Every year we get these lists of Game of the Year. The best games of the year, the best games of 21, 22, 23, and 1998, and then that's fine. And I'm for focusing on the yearly experience of gaming. Especially 2023, which was actually kind of an absolute banger from one game to the next. I feel like there was a period during the fall where literally it was one great game after the other. 2023 was also a horrific and terrible year for the gaming industry. 6,100 gaming jobs cut or laid off in 2023. Insanity. And I'm still reeling from Michael Salvatore and Michael Seacrest being let go from Bungie. Things weren't necessarily completely great. However, most of us don't live in a year-to-year sort of installment time frame. Most of us play games that are, have been out for years, and games that come out 2 or 3 years ago are still very much new and very much worth experiencing and worth talking about, and still should be in relevancy. Hell, even games that came out 10, 20 years ago are still worth experiencing. So I actually created my own list and decided to call it my favorite music and gaming experiences of 2023. It's a pretty big list, actually, covering everything I personally experienced in 2023 that I loved, some things that I didn't love, and these games made this year just slightly better. This is split up in a couple different ways. Some are just tracks from video games, others are the entire video game experience, and others still are a combination of both. Lies of P. I spent close to 8 hours on a boss and decided that I had had enough, despite Lies of P easily being my game of the year in terms of its art design, environmental storytelling, world design, music, and the general Belle Epoque essence of it. I love history, and it felt like walking through a magical history book. To me, this harrowing world is not one I'd like to visit anytime soon, though, if we're real, but I feel like it captured the Europe I think about when I think about Belle Epoque extremely well. The Belle Epoque was an era marked by peace, cultural advancements, innovative thinking, and general beauty. Culture grew, art flourished, think Monet, Van Gogh. Technology grew in importance, the wider use of electricity. Cinema became really representative and important and a valid form of entertainment. Even the telephone started popping up into the world. There was this sense of decadence and fashion in the upper class especially, and more, of course. There's also this particular moment in Lies of P when entering a certain building focused around music, an opera house, where as you're walking down the street, there's fire on either side of you. And this moment was so overwhelming. Right before that moment, you heard a woman warming up and preparing to go and sing at the opera house. You enter in the opera house, you're facing off with enemies that are singing. It was a really respectful way to portray opera in a mass media piece of work, and I thought it was incredibly stunning. Both the terrifying feeling of being isolated and alone with fire on either side of you as you're being attacked, and also, walking around this opera house with nightmare fuel at every corner. There was something so terribly beautiful about it. I didn't necessarily find any individual boss themes to be necessarily that dazzling or track worthy, or nor did I think that there were tracks really worth remembering in it per se, but it was the records that left a lasting impression on me. One track in particular, Feel, which is actually from one of the first records you find, I put it in the record player and I was instantly hooked into this song. I wasn't expecting this kind of music in Lies of P, and so when you first feel and hear Feel, you get this feeling of rapturous peace. It's sublimely simple jazz. You get a muted quality kind of like this, so you hear it because it's on the gramophone player. It's a beautifully somber piece that really reflects what it's like to show up at Hotel Krat and to have gone through and fought what you fought and then come back and rest and relax. And it's wonderful. It gives a peaceful moment of pause in an otherwise infuriating at times and destructive world full of madness and death. Despite not finishing the game, I actually love it with all my heart, and I'm glad to see that it's been received so positively in 2023. I was really, really excited for it. I'm glad it went well for the devs, and I'm really excited to see where they go with it, and maybe actually go back to it and try to finish it, but I'm not sure. My anger may not be able to handle it. So, Sound Embrace from Ace Combat Joint Assault and Ace Combat and Project Wingman also were just such gifts to me this year. I hear a lot of music these days, and I always have my ears glued to both what's coming out and what I may have missed, despite gaming since I was 7 years old. Clearly, I missed Sound Embrace, and really I missed all of Ace Combat until Ace Combat 7, but this is by far one of my favorite tracks I've heard, and easily in my top 20 video game songs ever made. I listen to this track almost every day. I find it insanely heroic, powerful. The strings recap the opening of the piece beautifully. There's a soprano chanting and vocalizing that like sends, like just shivers down your spine. It feels like this is the most empowering piece of music. It's an exceptional song that I've fallen madly in love with. And it has this subtle chorus in the background too that really adds to this layering and this in the stacking of the different layers. But for me, it's really the melodic essence of this piece that really just is so magnificent. The trombones especially, and then being doubled by the strings later on. The melody is so beautiful, full of confidence, introspection, and this commitment to seeing the mission through, and it super lights a fire in you. It makes you incredibly motivated, eager. And speaking of Ace Combat, I played Ace Combat 7 not for the first time, but this was the first time I was really playing for the sake of the music and paying attention to the music. And I genuinely thought there for a moment that I could only finish playing games for whatever reason, because between Ace Combat 7 and Project Wingman, I was so consumed by these games. There was a period of this year where I was falling asleep and getting really sleepy while streaming, but Ace Combat 7 and Project Wingman kept me like awake. I don't know why, but these stupid pew-pew playing games where the skies speak Latin and you're thrust into world combat and dogfights just sets me off. Maybe it's because the first game I ever played on our family computer was European Combat Flight Simulator by Microsoft. And I don't know, I have such a visceral reaction to playing games, but I distinctly remember being in Office Max and I saw this game and I was obsessed with World War II history at the time. And I begged my dad to buy it for me, and I played the absolute shit out of it. So I guess it makes sense that I'd be drawn to a combat fighter game, even though it's not World War II related. I love Ace Combat. The feeling of power, of fighting against insane pilot, essentially gods, that I don't possibly stand a chance against beating, and yet I come out on top. The music is phenomenal. Ace Combat itself has particularly blessed tracks like Drag Racer, Dual Wielder, Faceless Soldier, Archange, Daredevil, Hush, and Project Wingman's nothing to scoff at either. It's a love letter to Ace Combat games, literally made by 3 different people. It's no slouch. Jose Pavli's score gives me the exact same energy that Ace Combat's does. This feeling of getting up and having to fight back. It's so satisfying, especially a piece like Showdown, where you're literally just in a giant dogfight. I mean, it's like so incredibly cool. You feel confident. It's rock music, Kings, Presidia, and of course the 2 Peacekeeper tracks. They feature heavy organ, and when you're fighting against the Crimson Squadron, there's such an immense feeling of exhilaration and a sense of fear, because you really don't know if you're going to be able to win. And in fact, I don't want to spoil it, but I love these games, and they really just made my year so much better. Final Fantasy 13 is interesting because admittedly I fell off Final Fantasy 13 like I kind of expected I would. I like the characters in the world a lot, and I'm also super into the lore concepts, the l'Cie and the fal'Cie and all that, so the story doesn't really bother me. But man, the combat made me feel like I couldn't see straight between paradigm shifting and you're changing characters all the time, whether or not you want to or not. I was super overwhelmed by the combat, and it really kind of wasn't fun. I mean, it's like innovative in the sense that it was like it was diverse from other Final Fantasies, but I don't think it was a welcome change for me. And even though I love Final Fantasy and have this deep love for it, I couldn't see past it, and I couldn't keep going. And I don't even care about the linear design, because obviously we just had Final Fantasy 16 this year, which I'll talk about in a second. Our environments were kind of drab after a while. Like at first it was very bright, but then it felt very industrial and kind of drab, and everything looks dark and the same. So it got a little repetitive, but God, the soundtrack in this game is nuts. I think it actually may be one of the best Final Fantasy soundtracks that to date. I mean, Hamauzu is a fantastic composer, and these tracks feel weighty, satisfying, and frankly just like they go absolutely hard as hell. It's a glorious Final Fantasy soundtrack, and I think it retains a lot of the things that we love about Nobuo Uematsu, and it kind of totally deviates from them and does its own thing while still retaining the skeleton of the structure of why we love Final Fantasy. Saber's Edge, Blinded by Light, Lightning's theme, Sarah's theme. I think Final Fantasy 13 is seriously worth trying, It's an experience, especially if you like variety. And if you like variety, this is a soundtrack that you can absolutely love because there's tons of tracks that are interesting and worth listening to. There's pure orchestral magic mixed with prog rock, but different than the way you would think about it from the traditional sense of a Final Fantasy game. There's like heavy orchestration near the back half of this game. Yeah, I'd really recommend the game to you if you like Final Fantasy or if you're looking to try something new. And I guess while we're on the subject of Final Fantasy, we can't deny the other two big releases of 2023 for the franchise, Final Fantasy 16 and Theater Rhythm Final Bar Line. And I must admit, while I enjoyed the story of Final Fantasy 16, I really loved the acting, especially the main cast was extremely inspirational and I felt very connected to the characters. It was really the music that made the experience worth it for me. This is the type of game that I would have gone back and maybe watched someone play rather than played it myself. The gameplay after about like 10-ish hours for me got super stale. You know, you go down the hallway, you got your enemies, then you got your mini boss, then you got a hallway again, then you got some enemies, then you got a boss, and you just rinse and repeat that. And so I found myself wanting to get to the like meat of this game, which was the story for me. And yes, I know the side quests were interesting, but after a while I kind of just was like, whatever, I just want to get this done. But man, the soundtrack is a banger. It slaps. Titan versus Shiva, right near the top of the game, insane, holy shit. The Morble fight and the general boss music, To Sail Forbidden Seas, Away, Ascension, Titan Lost, Shiva's theme, some of the slower tracks too, like My Star, especially at the end, the Greatwood Forest, I think it was called, the beautiful piano. I think though, one of my big issues with this soundtrack is I wish there was an investment put into recording these tracks with an orchestra. I'm really confused as to why there wasn't a budget allocated to recording these tracks with a live orchestra session. There were a few tracks here that I genuinely did not think were actually good. Like they just didn't land. And I know that like in a sea of like literally hundreds of tracks for this game, obviously not everyone's going to be perfect, but some actually sounded bad because of the way that the horn was, like the fake quality of the horn in the sound sample just was so out of place, and it felt really weird to go from Final Fantasy 16, which was like this pure orchestral bliss and is gorgeously like alive sounding, to this like sound sampling for a mainline Final Fantasy. Just kind of felt weird, especially when you've got a game like Octopath Traveler 2, which is much less of a prominent, you know, cornerstone of the video game industry, which I believe was fully orchestrated and recorded. It doesn't really take away from it too much, honestly. Like, it doesn't matter, and maybe this is just like a snobby thing, but I just didn't always vibe with the OST because I kept thinking like, oh, this sounds so fake. And maybe it's just me. I love Soken. I love, you know, Creative Assembly. I love their work. Obviously, I love Final Fantasy XIV's music, but yeah, there was just a little thing that kind of stuck out to me quite a bit. But God, Ascension goes so hard. It's like the evolution of classical music. What's not to love? It was a really great experience to listen to it and also experience it in game. And the other big Final Fantasy release that I'm actually crazy about is Theater Rhythm Final Bar Line, which I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily know about or care about, but that's a rhythm game featuring music from all the Final Fantasy games with some paid DLC for other Square titles, and yeah, it's awesome. Easily one of my favorite games of the year. I still play it like regularly, like every week. If you're a Final Fantasy fan or a rhythm game fan, I can't emphasize playing this enough. It's just such a blast from start to finish with infinite replayability with various degrees of difficulty. It's so fun. Horror games really don't get acknowledged for their music. Not often, anyway. Yet for both Dead Space and Resident Evil 4, the music is actually a fundamental part of the experience, and I'd say that Dead Space requires music. It's funny because when I said I was going to be live streaming Resident Evil 4, people were like, does that even have music? Yeah, it does. Resident Evil 4 actually has amazing music, especially when you consider a fight with a character named Salazar, Baile de la Muerte. This extremely tense orchestral piece has this incredibly intense, fast movement, rhythm, and melody that really gets you thinking about Salazar as a character, as this angry and vicious entity, kind of at the end of his rope. It's crazy how intense this piece is in this fight, this sort of Baroque dance of death between Leon and Salazar. It represents the power Salazar finally feels, rage and sadness both at the same time. And on the flip side, Dead Space is an interesting mix of ambient mixed with melodically driven piece. I mean, most of these pieces in Dead Space are almost exclusively ambient, but Dead Space wouldn't be Dead Space without the music. Like, no one's listening to Dead Space in their cars, but go listen to the whispering vocals in Hunger for Stars and tell me you're not going to shit yourself when you play this game. The creepy strings, the discombobulated feeling, this OST makes you feel like you're backed into a corner with nowhere to go. It's uncomfortable, sonorally violent, and isolating and hyper alone. And I think that you feel more alone because of the way that this soundtrack plays. Ugh. And I guess you're not really alone when you really think about it. terrifying. Blasphemous 2 was an exceptional follow-up to the prior title. In every way, I think most people would say, with quality of life fixes, fun combat, and a great Metroidvania, obviously, to boot. Steeped in this classic Catholic art design with an edge. It's a riveting experience, actually, that I thoroughly enjoyed. But the soundtrack actually is what made the experience for me. I couldn't wait to get to a new zone and hear the new sections of music. There's this beautiful guitar, and it has a very Spanish quality. It's very rooted in classicism, and there's a real classical guitar element here with standout tracks like Corona de Siete Azahares, Subida Caligrafía de Plata, which has this flamenco rhythm marching piece that is just literally just like stomping or like smacking on the guitar and banging on the percussion, and it speeds up as the fight progresses. I've never heard that in a video game before. It was really, really cool. And actually, I've never really heard that outside of the classical music sphere. And then Nuestra Madre, which is this super plaintive and expressive track with a feeling of deep loss and trying to navigate through pain and suffering. Really, really sublime instrumentation in this soundtrack, and I recommend you check it out if you're interested at all. The Duviri Paradox, the track from the Warframe expansion by the same name, absolutely a modern classical marvel. This song, going through the emotions and feelings of Dominus Thrax, it's crazy. The range on display here with a string quartet and a singer is simply magnificent, and if you were to add this to like a purely classical music concert, people would not know the difference. They wouldn't know if it was released as a video game or if it was a classical music piece written in 2023. They just wouldn't know. And this is the kind of stuff that I get excited about because in my experience, classical composition in the standard sense made specifically for symphonies or opera houses sometimes struggles to be emotional and ends up feeling a bit too academic or like really difficult to sing. And while this sounds like it would be hard to learn, I don't think it would be very hard to master. And this piece is a total gem. I've played this for people. People think that it's a classical piece of music. They think that they would like to do it today. It just goes to show the song literally has 300,000 views on YouTube. People are open to classical music and are open to music that maybe they are not as comfortable with in their normal day-to-day lexicon. It shows that A, having a frame of reference really helps, and B, if you just sit with a piece of music, you end up falling in love with it. And that's the beauty of what video game music can do for people. And I think that a lot of people are sort of mystified by classical music or by opera music as this thing that is incredibly powerful. And you hear stories about soldiers that say that they listened to classical music and opera to get them through when they were in wartime because it felt very powerful and very human and very raw. And I think that Duviri Paradox is a prime example of that. So in 2023, I actually played Undertale for the first time, and I have to say, it really is a masterwork, isn't it? I really wasn't sure about Undertale. Felt like the hype wasn't worth it, but I've cried in video games twice. Final Fantasy XIV's Endwalker expansion multiple times. The mirror in Undertale made me ugly cry. That damn mirror. There's something about the fourth wall where it feels like the game is speaking to you, the player, directly, which obviously Undertale does this multiple times. It just hit me right in the heart. And that's what Undertale ultimately is to me. It's a piece about heart, about compassion, about forgiveness. And I'm really glad I played it and got to experience it finally. There's such an insane variety of sounds and music in this particular game. There's a truly fun cast of characters besides Sans. I hate him. There's so much to love here. It's an experience, and a year later, I still viscerally remember many aspects of this. Honestly though, like I said, the soundtrack is just so unique. Between Snowden Town to Megalovania to everything in between, Dummy, there really is something here for everybody. And there's a lot of introspection and reflection that comes with a lot of these pieces. I've been playing World of Warcraft for about 3 weeks now, and I'm sitting around 55 hours, and I have gorged myself on this beautiful MMORPG. I literally have never played it, and I've always wanted to, but after committing like 500 and odd hours to Final Fantasy XIV, I decided I wanted a break. And so I naturally pivoted to WoW. And WoW is interesting to me because it's been around for 19 years. And in those 19 years, there have been positives. Of course, there have been many negatives. And there's all manner of people that have come and gone after a 19-year game. People have moved on. People have had kids and families, and they can't, focus on video games anymore. The gameplay experience that Blizzard provides is fundamentally more or less the same, but different. It's changed, but it hasn't. And some people absolutely hate it now, are jaded from it, burnt out, and others love it, or others are like me and coming in for the first time. I've loved my time with it, and I'm barely even scratching the surface. when it comes to the experience of playing it. The music, this beautiful ambient structure that some may call forgettable, but that I personally feel is magical. And I've really started thinking about the value of ambient music thanks to WoW. So often I lean towards melodic music that I can hum, or music that I personally feel speaks to me. But the beauty of WoW is that the ambient music does a phenomenal job of building worlds for you as a player. To feel like you're part of the experience, to feel like you're in Teldrassil, to feel like you're in the woods, to feel like you're flying above a mountain. In other MMOs, like in Final Fantasy XIV especially, the music feels like it's really there for you or for the characters you're fighting against. It's very much front and center, melodic. I'm the warrior of light, the savior of the world. Therefore, the music needs to be the center of attention. Whereas World of Warcraft, with its forgettable music, actually allows the player to kind of breathe in the world. It makes you feel like you're a small part of it. It's a very complex thing to talk about ambient versus melodic music and what the difference is. And ambient music done well is incredibly evocative of, essentially it's its own sort of environmental storytelling. It really feels like I'm stepping into Azeroth when I listen to this stuff, and that nothing else matters really besides how I choose to be in the world and what I choose to do in it. It's fantastic. Can't wait to keep playing. In fact, I'm thinking about it right now. And Cyberpunk 2077, Phantom Liberty. I've talked at length about this soundtrack, and I've talked about how the soundtrack has totally destroyed me. But Phantom Liberty is absolutely my soundtrack of the year, next to Octopath Traveler 2, and I'll tell you why, in terms of listenability. I love this soundtrack. Something for a workout, it's perfect. It's bleak, powerful, reflective, haunting, peaceful, jagged, alarming, disarming, and I think a profound discussion piece on how emotion can exist within music and rip open the hearts of listeners. I judge soundtracks based on how well I can listen to them out of context. How many of the soundtrack pieces, the track titles, can I take and listen to and go away and listen to them and enjoy them? That's why something like Nier is in Nier Automata is in one of my top 10 soundtracks ever, because every single track is a track I don't skip. That's what makes a fantastic soundtrack to me. Phantom Liberty's soundtrack is one of these soundtracks that forces you to want to play the game. It wants you to experience it. It's fantastic out of context, but also in context, it adds so much. It was fun to listen to before and then experience in-game, and I still end up falling in love with how I felt out of context. Man, they really knocked it out of the park with this one. It's a gem. Some honorable mentions for the year for me are Everhood, which is a crazy rhythm adventure game that flips the concept of rhythm games on their heads. Basically, I wouldn't say that the music is very memorable aside from a couple tracks, but what's crazy is that the game makes you pay attention to every song that plays because you actively have to dodge the rhythm of the enemy character as you enter into battle with them. That's very different from your standard rhythm game where you're hitting notes and trying to be in sync. This, you're actively dodging music. It's fantastic. Really, really cool. Headbangers, a rhythm game battle royale. It's insane. I love it. It's so unique. It's so good, especially for a musician. It's just so much fun. And I have this desire to be good. Astral Ascent. I tend to shy away from roguelikes because I feel like they're kind of dark and a little bit they're a little drab. But Astral Ascent is super bright. I love the premise of the game too. Your goal is to make your way through the 12 signs of the Zodiac, and you fight each of the members of the Zodiac. The OST is totally lovely and gushing with personality, and it's really the bright colors and the vibrancy of the game coupled with the vibrancy of the soundtrack, both in its battle themes and its casual themes, that make me actually want to keep playing. And I have to say, I gloss over on roguelikes very frequently. Besides this and a couple deck builders, Slay the Spire, dicey dungeons, that kind of stuff is fun for me, but this just is hitting the spot. Also in 2023, I started playing Monster Hunter Rise. I have about 115 hours in Monster Hunter World, and I loved my time with World, but Rise is way more fun for me. It's way faster paced. It's got incredible music. I love the Japanese themes. It's just so good. Every different overworld that you hear has different themes that are fantastic. Some monsters have different themes. It's just wonderful. Magnamalo is such an amazing flagship monster. It's so fun to beat him. And I'm playing it more in the new year just because it just oozes personality and I kind of miss it. And the soundtrack is just oof. Punishing Grey Raven. Gotcha games get a bad rap, and I totally get that, but PGR has a shockingly good graphic novel story, and the combat experience is genuinely so satisfying. That and the EDM soundtrack by Vanguard Sound has literally at times just left me slack-jawed with my mouth on the floor or dancing in this chair. It's really made me fall in love with EDM in and out of video games, and it's just been so fun to play. I really can't recommend this one enough to you. Don't spend a dime, just enjoy the story for the first few world building chapters. It's a really good mobile game that actually now has a PC client. And seriously, the soundtrack is so wild. Chrono Trigger, Corridors of Time. I mean, I can't believe I had never played this masterpiece until now. It's such a streamlined experience too. This is a classic RPG. It's pure fun. It really isn't too bad. It holds up insanely well. The best part is there's barely any grinding in the traditional sense. It's just such a pure game. It doesn't ask too much of you. It takes you on a journey. There's great characters you can emotionally invest yourself into. Great music by Yasunori Mitsuda with some help from Nobuo Uematsu. It was super fun. I'm so glad I played this game this year. Fate Samurai Remnant. I'm a sucker for Japanese period stuff, and this is actually like the first like traditional non-gacha anime game I've ever played. Also my first time in the Fate series, and I love the concept, and this game also has the Mosuo style game that's like Dynasty Warriors, but kind of light version of that. Story's really good, and it has a diverse and interesting cast of characters. It's kind of a comfort game for me right now. I love it. 11 hours in, and I'm definitely going to be finishing this one. You know, the soundtrack's nothing really to like write home about, but it's the whole package is just so great, and the interactions between the two main characters are just there's just Yordi and Saber, just like so much fun. And Octopath Traveler 2. So I'm like 2 hours into this one, and I really can't say much about the story, but I gotta say, this soundtrack has got to be the best soundtrack of 2023 for me, and even the last couple years. It's just so exceptionally and unabashedly melodic. The main theme feels like lifting you up on a journey. Even the night theme is so peaceful, so reflective. It's so satisfying to listen to. Every character has a theme that helps with their characterization, with storytelling. Every area has a day and night theme, recorded with real instruments. It's deeply gorgeous in the visual presentation. Every town has music, day and night themes. And I'm not talking like just like a prettier, like a calmer version, like completely different arrangements with the same melodies, with vocalists and stuff. It's beautiful. The battle themes are exceptional and diverse. It's not always just the same one over and over and over. The final boss has operatic vocals, which is crazy. It's awesome. I can't wait to play more of it in 2024. And genuinely, I was just so happy with my personal video game journey in 2024. I have a huge backlog of games to get through, and so I've started that as much as I can. I'm playing through Control, which has been amazing from an audio design perspective, a sound design perspective. I'm really excited to see myself keep working through this backlog in 2024 while also keeping up with all of the games that are also going to come out in 2024 with awesome soundtracks. And yeah, what did you love about 2023? Did you play most games from this year? Did you play games from past years? What was your game of the year? What was your experience like this year? I'd love to know. As always, thanks a ton, and I'll see you later. Bye.